You don't react the way people expect you to. Things happen and you stay composed. You don't raise your voice. You don't respond immediately. You don't let things show the way most people do. And from the outside, that often gets interpreted as control. Like you're just naturally steady, like things don't affect you as much. But that's not usually what's happening. Because internally, there's still a response. There's still a reaction forming. It just doesn't move outward in the same way. You think it through first. You process it quickly. You organize what you're feeling before it ever becomes visible. So what people see is the final version, not the initial experience. And over time, that becomes consistent. You respond instead of react. You stay level instead of shifting. And eventually, that starts to feel like your default. Not something you're doing, just something you are. But patterns like this don't usually form without a reason. They tend to develop in environments where reacting didn't lead anywhere different, where staying composed was more effective than expressing what you felt. And when that works even a few times, it starts to repeat, until one day you're no longer noticing the shift, you're just living inside it. You may not remember when this started. It usually doesn't feel like a decision. There isn't a moment when you consciously choose to respond differently. It happens more gradually than that. Over time, you begin to notice something. You react to a situation, you feel something strongly, you express it, and nothing really changes. The outcome stays the same. The response from others stays the same. So you try a different approach. You hold it in. You think it through first. You respond more carefully, and that tends to work better. It keeps things more stable. It avoids unnecessary escalation, and because of that, you start to notice a pattern. Reacting emotionally doesn't always move things forward. It doesn't shift outcomes. It doesn't alter how people respond. And when something doesn't create results, you naturally begin to rely on what does. So instead of reacting, you start adjusting. You think faster. You process quicker. You move towards solutions instead of expression. You begin to anticipate outcomes before they fully unfold. You stay ahead of the moment instead of inside it. And because that works more consistently, it becomes reinforced. Not consciously, but through repetition. Each time it works, it confirms the pattern. Each time it prevents something from escalating, it strengthens the response. Until reacting less no longer feels like something you are choosing. It starts to feel natural. Like this is simply how you respond to things. At a certain point, staying composed becomes useful. Not just in a general way, but in very specific situations. You start to see what happens when things remain steady. Conversations stay more controlled. Outcomes feel more predictable. There is less disruption overall, and that begins to matter. It keeps things stable. It prevents situations from escalating. It allows you to stay clear-headed when things are uncertain. And over time, you start to rely on that stability. Because when you stay steady, you don't lose your footing. You don't say things you would need to take back. You don't react in ways that could shift the situation in the wrong direction. You remain in control of yourself, even when the situation itself is not fully controlled. And that creates a sense of consistency. So even when something affects you, your attention moves in a specific direction. You notice the feeling, but you don't move with it immediately. Instead, you hold your position. Your priority shifts. It is no longer about expressing what you feel in that moment. It becomes about maintaining your place within the situation, keeping your tone steady, keeping your response measured, keeping the interaction from shifting too far. And the more this works, the more automatic it becomes. You regulate your tone without thinking about it. You adjust your response in real time. You stay level, even when something internally is not. Not because nothing is happening, but because staying composed serves a purpose that expression does not always serve. And once that purpose becomes clear, the pattern tends to stay in place. The reaction doesn't go away. It just moves to a different place. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that feels obvious, but in a way that changes when it shows up. Instead of happening in real time, it gets delayed. You feel something, you register it, but you do not move with it immediately. You hold it for a moment. You keep your response steady. You stay focused on what is happening in front of you, and the feeling gets set aside, not ignored, not dismissed, just postponed. It gets held, contained, until there is space for it. And that space usually comes later, when things are quieter, when there is no longer a need to respond, when the situation has already passed. That is when the processing begins to unfold more fully. You think through what happened. You revisit the moment. You make sense of how it affected you. So in the moment, you appear unaffected, but internally, there is still activity. Thoughts are moving. Connections are forming. Meaning is being organized. It is just happening outside of what other people can see. And because this pattern repeats, it starts to feel normal. It does not feel like something is being held back. It does not feel like something is being suppressed. It feels like timing, like you are simply choosing when to process instead of whether to process. And over time, that distinction becomes so familiar that it just feels like how you function. Because your reactions aren't visible, people start interpreting you a certain way. Not all at once, but gradually based on what they consistently see. They notice that you stay composed, that you do not react quickly, that you handle things without much outward change. And from that, they begin to form conclusions. They assume things don't affect you as much. They see you as steady, reliable, unaffected. Not because they have asked, but because that is what appears to be true. And over time, that becomes their expectation. They come to you with the assumption that you will handle things the same way, that you will stay level, that you will not need much in return. So they rely on you differently. They respond to you differently. They may share less concern, offer less support, check in less often, not intentionally, not with awareness, but in response to the version of you that has been consistently visible. And when something is not expressed outwardly, it is often treated as if it is not there. So your internal experience and how others perceive you start to move in different directions. What you feel and what is recognized are no longer the same thing. And that separation happens quietly. There is no clear moment where it shifts, no obvious change in behavior, just a gradual difference between what is experienced internally and what is understood externally. And because everything still appears steady on the surface, that difference often goes unnoticed. You didn't stop reacting because nothing affects you. That is often how it looks from the outside, like things do not reach you in the same way, like you are naturally less affected. But internally, that is not usually what is happening. There is still a response. There is still an impact. It is just handled differently. You stopped reacting because reacting stopped being useful at some point. There were moments where expression did not change the outcome, moments where reacting did not improve the situation, and over time you adjusted to that. Not all at once, not consciously, but through repetition. You learned to move toward what worked, to rely on what kept things stable, to stay composed instead of shifting with the moment. And when something works, it tends to repeat, especially when it works early, because early patterns have a way of becoming foundational. They shape how you respond before you even think about it. They become familiar, predictable, reliable. So even when your environment changes, the pattern often stays the same. Not because it is still required, but because it became integrated into how you function. And after a while, it no longer feels like something you learned. It just feels like you.